My name is Neal Strauss. I am one of the Upwork ambassadors in the United States. In addition to being an Upwork ambassador, I'm also a top-rated social media strategist, and I've been freelancing through Upwork for, I think this is coming up on my 8th year, but this summer will be, I think July 7th is my anniversary of joining Upwork. So we're getting very close there. But yeah, anyways, part of my the role that I'm holding right now, or my job right now, is to create community events like this to welcome in incredible speakers like our guest Jeff Stroller, who will introduce himself in just a moment, and to share some knowledge of other things that are happening outside in our industry and to connect people together. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Jeff. In terms of housekeeping, we'll be doing, Jeff will have a little presentation for us. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll have time for a live Q&A with Jeff. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A box, as that's where I'll be monitoring those questions there. If there's anything that's very specific to your industry or specific to your business, I may say to ask either a local expert or reach out to Upwork support. But I'm happy to answer any questions we have. And Jeff, I hope you'll be able to help us out understanding some business structures. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us, Jeff.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, Neal. I've had a real pleasure being part of the Upwork community for the last 4.5 years, and it's been a pleasure. I'm an attorney. I'm an accountant. I worked at a big accounting firm. I was a professor of finance and law at the University of Southern California. And for most of my career, I've been in private companies, but I got back into practicing law as a real lawyer when I joined Upwork about 4.5 years ago. And it's a real experience. And I have to say that I have had some fair degree of success. And before we get into the business organizations, which is the topic of this, I want to talk about that for a moment because it's really important. And I'm not saying this or telling you this purely as an attorney or a consultant or someone pointing their finger at you and saying, do this, don't do that. This is what I'm going to tell you was really my experience, because we all want to be successes. No question, that goes without saying. But sometimes stuff happens that just makes that not possible. When I was in my late 20s, I had an idea. Of course, I thought it was brilliant, but some other people, particularly in the entertainment business, thought it was a very good idea too. They adopted it for their businesses. That's not what affected me. What affected me was that for a variety of reasons, some that I could control, some that I couldn't control. Sometimes like a pandemic, that didn't happen back then. I didn't succeed. I failed. And it really hit me hard. I was very depressed. I shut myself off from friends and family, if not physically, certainly emotionally. And that actually lasted for a few years. What I should have done, I should have gone back to the accounting firm that I was working for, had a good job at. I could have gone back to USC and said, hey, I tried this, didn't work. Now I know my place is here. But I didn't do that. Why? I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I thought I was a failure. My insecurity was sky high. And, I just had very low self-esteem. And I didn't have the support network around me to help me pull it out. I had to do it myself. And, and I'm not saying that people weren't around me. They just didn't know. And the reason I'm bringing this up is so that you can know how important it is, to not be defined by what you do or can't do. Defined by how you are as a person. You hear the stories, if you fall off a horse, get back on the horse and learn from your mistakes. Listen, it's great to analyze. It's great to figure out what you could have done better. But the other thing is just sort of emotional and spiritual, that you have to feel good about what you did. And if you did your best, okay, it didn't work, but don't shut people out. Don't alienate people. Your friends are still your friends. Your family is still going to love you. And even if none of this applies to you, it probably might apply to someone you know, a friend, a family member, a client. You know, I mean, this webinar is not just available, as far as I know, it's not just available to freelancers, it's available to clients too. And every single client and freelancer on here is an entrepreneur. You know, most of us wake up every morning unemployed. That's how I feel. And so that's why I'm very aggressive about being an Upworker and finding work and finding clients and doing the best job I can and paying a lot of attention to it. So if, you know, I'd like to start this webinar by just with that message that please, if something happens to you or your friends or someone you know and care about, okay, don't let yourself disappear. Okay. You know, stay involved with other people, stay involved with the people who this is happening to. Okay. It's really important for them and for you. Okay. So now the topic is business organizations. A couple of housekeeping items for us. One is that everything you're going to hear on this is my opinion. Don't call Neal, don't call Upwork, don't say you said this and Upwork said this and Upwork said to do this. Upwork and Neal are not saying to do anything. I'm the one who's talking. If you have a question, you're welcome to contact me. Pretty much everything in here is from my book, but this is the topic that comes up the most with new clients and people that I talk to is what kind of business organization do I need, or do I need any? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. Now, everybody's circumstances are different. So all we can do in this short time is talk about a general broad overview. And if it gives you some thoughts, something to think about, I always try and do a session, a class, where you leave and you knew something you didn't know before, or you can do something that you couldn't do before. And you may not know all the answers, but hopefully you at least know a few more of the questions to ask. And that's where we're going to go. So the first question we're going to ask is, what are the choices when you're going to be in business? Is anything, doesn't matter. What are your choices? Okay. Here are some possible choices. Sole proprietorship. Sole proprietorship is when it's just you. You start a business, you provide a service, you make the money, you spend the money. It's taxed to you. It's everything happens is you. Now, I'm not going to get into the specific factors because we're going to talk about that in a minute, but just as definition, a sole proprietor is just you. There's nothing between you and the client in any respect. Okay. A general partnership is more or less two or more sole proprietors getting together. General partnership has some real liability. And we're going to talk about it in the personal liability section, but it is two people get together, they say, let's create a business, but there's no entity. It's just the two of you, or three, four of you, two or more sole proprietors. Limited partnership is a particular form of business. As you might imagine, limited refers to limited liability, and it has some things in common with partnerships. But it is a very specific form. It used to be very popular. These days, it's used primarily for investment funds and real estate funds. And in the past 4 years, I've worked on 2. So even if there's somebody in this group to which this might apply, it really doesn't cover a broad enough spectrum of potential listeners and viewers. So we're not going to talk about that. I do want to go back to sole proprietorship for a moment, because even if a business is just you, you can have a fictitious business name. So Jeff Stroller doesn't always have to do business as Jeff Stroller. You can have a business name. magnify investments or magnetic consultants or whatever you want to have. Okay, that's called the DBA, doing business as or a fictitious business name. And as we go down, again, general partnership, limited partnership, we're not going to talk about it today. It's just too narrow. The two entities that are most common, I'm sure you already know this, are limited liability companies and corporation. Now, the idea of a limited liability company or a corporation, they have their own unique conditions, but the idea is that they are each an individual and separate legal person, not a natural person. They don't live and breathe, they don't walk and talk, but they can own things, they can sell things, they can have rights, they can be sued. And just as this is what's important is this actually comes from about 400 years ago, because the first corporation was called the East India Company. It was allowed to be formed by Queen Elizabeth I. And at one time, that company was the biggest trading company in the world. It was the first time that an entity separate from the people was allowed to have its own identity, to buy, own, sell, have rights, contract with people. And that was the very first time. Now, that concept of being a separate, independent person, a legal person, not a natural person, is still the essence of what our limited liability companies and corporations are today. And it is essential to how we maintain those entities and how you as the owner or as one of the owners relates to the company, because it's critical in preserving the benefits that you get from that entity. So let's take a look at the three factors that we're going to talk about it today in deciding what kind of entity you might want to have. The first is personal liability. The second, taxes. And the third is investors. Right. Let's take a look at each one of these in relation to those possible forms of doing business. Right. So, sole proprietorship, personal liability, it's all yours. Whatever happens, it's on you. If you get into a problem, someone sues you, everything you own is in jeopardy. Your house, car, everything, assuming you own a house and car. But it's really important. Now, if you're in a business that doesn't have a lot of potential liability, maybe it's no big deal, right? But just understand that's what goes along with being a sole proprietor. Same thing goes with general partnership, except it's worse. Why is it worse? Because not only are you responsible for what you as a sole proprietor would have been doing, but you are also responsible for everything that your partners are doing. So if Neal and I go out and we say we're going to form a general partnership, and we go out and Neal signs a lease on a nice office space in Philly, I'm responsible for that. Even though I found out about it afterwards, I'm responsible. And if I go out and I hit someone with a car as part of our business, guess what? Neal's responsible for that too. So as a consequence, I don't recommend general partnership to anybody. Now, think about the word partner. We all, including me, we all use the word partner in a conversational or colloquial sense. My partner this, and he's my partner. That's fine, as long as we understand that in a conversational sense, a partner means somebody who you're in business with. Whereas in a legal sense, a partner, the word partner, has real legal consequences. And in my mind, not good ones. So I never recommend a general partnership to anybody. Now we've got the limited liability company and the corporation. Both of those, the whole point of them is that there's no personal liability. One caveat, like we talked about right at the beginning, from the beginning of corporations, back when Queen Elizabeth I allowed it to start, you have to make sure that you treat the entity as a truly independent person. Don't put your money in the company's bank account. Don't do the opposite. Don't commingle everything. You know, it's not just your other pocket. Think of it as another person. And if you wanted to borrow money from that other person, would you just reach into that person's pocket and take it? Or would you have a deal You'd have maybe a promissory note. You'd have some sort of bookkeeping entry to show that this transaction took place. That's the essential elements. And if you do that, if you maintain that independent integrity of the entity, these companies, these forms of business, the limited liability company and the corporation, will do their job to protect you. You may want some additional protection in the form of insurance, but the essential protection of the corporate entity, limited liability company or corporation, that's its job, and it'll do it. So just to wrap this subject up, like I said, we're not even going to talk about general partnership anymore because I don't recommend it and I don't want anybody to do it. Okay, let's move on. The next factor we're going to talk about is taxes. Sole proprietorship. Like I said, everything goes right to your personal tax return. If you earn it, if you spend it, it's on your personal tax return. It's just on a particular schedule, but there's no other entity, no limited liability company, no partnership tax return, nothing. It's just you. Okay? Very simple. Limited liability company. The default, and I use that word importantly because default usually means that you start with something and you might be able to change it. The default is personal. So now you have an entity, a separate legal person, but you, the owner or owners, are still paying personal taxes. How is that possible? It's possible because by default, a limited liability company is called a pass-through. It's even called disregarded entity if it's a sole member. But either way, the company doesn't pay any tax, any income taxes. Any money that the company makes goes right through to the personal tax returns of the owners. Okay? Makes a lot of sense. Very simple. You have protection. Okay? We'll follow up with that in a bit. Then we have the corporation. Corporation, by default, again, is corporate and personal. There's both. When you hear the expression double taxation, this is what it means. It means that the corporation will pay taxes on its net income. And then if it gives any money as dividends to the shareholders, they're going to pay tax again also. So why on earth would someone choose double taxation? Why would you want that? Well, the reason you might want that is because personal tax rates can be higher than corporate tax rates, which means that you are going to pay more tax than the company would pay. So if you're going to take money out, pay tax, and put money back into the company, then you're going to end up with less money to put back in than if you just left it in a corporation to begin with. And that's why you might choose corporate and personal, double taxation. Someone out there is saying, what about an S Corp? Okay. An S Corp is a corporation that has a particular tax treatment. It is exactly the same. For corporations are formed at the state level. You do a filing. It's actually very easy to file for corporations. I tell people they can do it themselves, but still oftentimes people want to hire me because they might not know the answers to the questions that they're going to be asked. But you can do it yourself. An S corporation is formed exactly the same way, except that there is an election under the Internal Revenue Code that allows the owners to treat the corporation as a pass-through, the same as a limited liability company. So in that case, then it is treated and the taxes are personal. The nice thing about, there's lots of nice things, but one of the nice things about these is you don't have to pick one and that's the only thing you can ever do. You can start with one, and as your life circumstances change, as business circumstances change, as partners change, you can change the form of organization as the need arises. Okay, you can't do it month to month, but if you start with a limited liability company and you find, aha, now we're making money, we don't want to pay personal corporate taxes, you can change it. Okay, let's move on to the third factor. Investors. Sole proprietors, remember, it's just you. So investors means that typically they own something. There's nothing to own when it's just you. Can they own a piece of your activity? Yes. Can they lend you money? Sure. But can they own you? Not supposed to. So if you're going to want investors, you can take lenders and you can take investors in your activities, but you can't take investors in you per se. Not saying that there aren't some creative ways to do it, especially now, especially with tokens and NFTs, but traditionally the definition of investors is that a sole proprietor can't be divvied up among its owners. Go into limited liability company, and yes, I don't put some because you can't do it. I put some because, as opposed to corporation, where a corporation can have thousands or tens of thousands of shareholders if they're a public company, limited liability companies tend to not have that kind of numbers. If you're going to have a few dozen, yes. It gets more cumbersome, and corporations are easier to manage when you have a lot of shareholders, especially if you're going to go public. So sole proprietorship, none. Limited liability company, some, yes. And a corporation, yes. Okay. Now, let's put that all into the context of what your interests are going to be. Okay. If personal liability is your major concern, then you certainly don't want a sole proprietorship. Okay? You want one of the other three forms of entities: limited liability company, corporation, or an S corporation. If you make enough money that you reinvest in your business, or you want to consider making some business investments, so you don't want to necessarily take it out and then put it back in, then you want to focus on the limited liability company or the corporation. Now, remember I said earlier, limited liability company is a pass-through, but I also said that was the default. The default is it's a pass-through entity and you pay personal taxes, but you can make an election. Just like you can make an election with a corporation to have it taxed as a pass-through S Corp, you can also do the reverse with a limited liability company, and you can make that taxed as a corporation. Some of the uniqueness and differences of why you'd want to do that. Why would you want to form a limited liability company in order just to tax it as a corporation? There are some management differences. There are some bookkeeping differences and maintenance differences that might make you want to do that. That really is a specific circumstances that you need to talk to your own accountant and lawyer about, but it's a possibility. Makes it a little more complex because it gives you more choices, but it's certainly a possibility. Okay. Again, if you're going to want to reinvest money, you don't necessarily want to pay taxes on it personally and then put it back in if you paid higher tax rates than the corporation. Okay. Next. If your top priority is simplicity, it's just you're providing services where there's not much liability and everything you make is going to maintaining your life and your family, then you're going to want to stay with either a sole proprietorship or a limited liability company. It's simpler. The limited liability company you see is in green, and I've been using green for things that are sort of in the middle. Limited liability company doesn't have to be that hard to manage. Depending on the kind of business you have, you might be able to form it in another state and operate in another state. People hear that Delaware is a great state to form corporations. Actually, Wyoming is a very good state to form single member LLCs because it's the only state that actually has specific laws to protect single members. And in talking about the importance of maintaining the integrity and managing all these things, sometimes you might forget and whatever, but the Wyoming laws actually have provisions that are very forgiving in that respect. So that's why that might be, if you're in e-com or, I think everybody on here is from the US, but lots of times when I have foreign clients who want to set up an e-com business or a certain kinds of other businesses, I put them in Wyoming. Okay. And if you're going to want to take investors or give some equity to key people, obviously sole proprietorship is out, and the other three are the ways you want to go. S Corporation has some limits. And as soon as you get into starting to advertise for investors or talk to people you don't know, then the SEC is going to start applying, and you need to be careful that you're not in violation of any SEC rules when you're raising money. Typically, if you're on a crowdfunding site, they've already complied. There are SEC rules there, and if once you comply and you fill out their forms, then you've complied with what they need to do. If you're going out and you're talking to friends and family, you're probably in good shape too. But as soon as you start talking to people that you don't know, then you really need to start talking to an attorney who knows what they're doing and can help you through this. So I am happy to, like I said, all of this material comes from the book. The book was a result of having clients who really just sort of all asked the same similar questions. And it was frustrating to see how many people were baffled by the same issues on business and accounting and law and marketing. I'm not going to, this is not, you want to be an entrepreneur for dummies series. But this is a good introduction. And as I say in the preface of the book, it can't possibly answer all the questions, but it can raise a lot of the questions, so you know to ask a question. So please feel free to ask any questions. The book, as you can see, it's available at Amazon or your favorite bookstore. Just request second edition. And I'm available for questions now. I'm available for questions later. And Matt, I will turn it over back to Neal.
Jeff, thank you so much for that. That was, though it was only a short amount of time, that was a ton of information. Especially, I loved learning about the East India Trading Company. I did not realize that was the first business around, but I do know that was in the Pirates of the Caribbean and a few other movies there. So glad to know there's some history in that. But we do have a couple of questions that are coming in so far. So if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you a few of them. And there's, first of all, there's a couple of people asking about your book. I'll drop a link to your book in the chat in just a moment. So this way, if anybody wants to grab that link from Amazon, they can take it from there. There's a couple of other people that are asking about different states to start their own business. And to your last point there about Delaware versus Wyoming, are there specific states that are better than others? How do you know which is a good state for you to start your business in?
Well, if you have offices, if you have warehouses, if you have employees, it's going to be, you have to be in the state, registered in the state where you have all that activity. Sometimes what people do is they say, well, let's form in Delaware, but I'm going to have an office. This just happened this morning. I want to form in Delaware, and I'm going to have an office in California. And I asked them why. And they said, well, it just seems like that's what other people are doing. Okay. But by doing that, you are going to pay Delaware and you're going to pay California to be a foreign corporation. Because if you are a foreign corporation, it doesn't, in that sense, mean from Canada or Mexico, it means from another state. And if you have a physical presence, be it your own warehouse, and let me differentiate. I don't mean you're an e-com and you're using a 3PL, third-party logistics, or you're using fulfillment by Amazon. That does not constitute a presence in another state that makes you registered. So if, for instance, you're in the e-com business, then you can really be anywhere and you can send your goods. If you are manufacturing outside the country, they can be sent to any warehouse anywhere in the country, as long as it's not yours. And you don't have to register somewhere else. So the choice of state depends on the nature of the business. Obviously, state taxes, for instance, in Wyoming and Nevada, there are no state income taxes. Delaware, there are state income taxes only for your sales in Delaware. And then in California, there are a lot of state taxes. So it really depends on physically where you are, where you're going to have your stuff, and the nature of your business. So I can't, there's no one answer that's good for everybody because everybody's different. But I can say that it really depends, it depends a lot on the nature of your business and where you're going to have your stuff.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful. I guess on a similar line of questioning, there's someone here that's asking about international rules there. So this person's an international student here in the US. Do you know if there are any limitations on forming or owning a business as not a citizen of the US, but starting a business here?
Well, in general, the answer is, can a foreign person own a business here? Yes. Can a foreign person living in the US under a student visa own a business here? Yes. Can they work in that business? No. That would violate the student visa. So they have to be really careful about that. And the distinction, where do you draw the line between owning a business and doing what an owner does as opposed to working in it? I think it's very touchy, especially with a student visa. I mean, you certainly don't want to violate that student visa. And I've dealt with this a number of times. Also with the H-1B visas, where people come over and they're brought over to work in one company, and they can own another business, but they can't work in that other company because that's not what was on their H-1B visa. So again, you've got to be a little careful about that. And I am not an immigration attorney. I know just enough to be dangerous and to know where the questions are. So that's where the questions are. So please, if you're here on a student visa and you want to own a business, talk to not just a business attorney, but talk to an immigration attorney to make sure that whatever you're doing doesn't violate that, because you don't want to get kicked out for that.
Thank you. And then there's a lot of people that are also moving around in terms of, since COVID started, you may live somewhere and then you no longer have to be tied down to that city or to that place. So as you travel around, or even if you're traveling throughout the year, we were just talking about before the call started about how you did some traveling. I'm going to be doing some traveling soon. Is there any problems with traveling around and where your business is located, or keeping a business in a certain place while you are traveling around?
Not really. That's the question that we started with was what state to create your business in. And I said, it really depends on the nature of your business. If you're a consultant, if you're providing personal services, if you're e-com and you're shipping stuff in from outside the country, you got a lot of flexibility. I mean, you could, pretty much create your entity wherever you want, wherever it makes sense. As long as you don't have that sort of physical presence, an office, warehouse, employees in whatever state that you're in right now. So there's a lot of flexibility, and more and more, one of the things that we find, even with professional organizations that have rules on performance of services, is that the job platforms like Upwork really serve a very social and good purpose, because it makes services available to a lot more people at fair prices. And even for some state organizations that are licensing organizations, they've in some cases they've relaxed rules or sometimes they just ignore them to allow people to be able to provide those services. I'm not saying that's true everywhere. I'm not saying that's true in every case or every profession, but there's a lot more flexibility now because those organizations are having to deal with the reality of remote working, people working from home, and people being able to provide services from anywhere in the world. So there's a lot of flexibility about movement and where you're working from. And Upwork has contributed to that enormously.
Thank you, Jeff. So Switching gears just a little bit, Letitia has a question about what should their business income be before deciding to incorporate as an LLC or deciding to incorporate in any fashion. Is there a financial marker before someone decides to incorporate?
Okay, so going back to our three factors, assuming that personal liability is not an issue here. Okay, so let's put that aside, and this is solely a factor of taxes. Okay, then you have to look at what are you doing? Are you making a profit? If you're making a profit, what are you using that profit for? If you are using it all for your personal, family, living expenses, then you want a pass-through. You don't want to have anything in between paying taxes. So you don't want double taxation in that case. Can you create an entity like a limited liability company or an S Corp as a pass-through? Sure, absolutely you can. Okay? But you want a pass-through. Now, at what point do you not want to pass through? At what point do you want an LLC or corporation that is not a pass-through? The financial number is when you're making enough money that you are not taking it out of the business. You don't need it for your business. I mean, you don't need it for your family, and you're going to leave it in the business to grow your business. And your personal tax rate is more than the corporate tax rate. So the corporate tax rate now is 21%. At the point where you are making enough money that you want to leave it in the company and your personal tax rate is more than 21%, that's when you really want to start looking at an entity that is not a pass-through. An entity that's not a pass-through. So I know there's a couple of pieces of the puzzle that come together, and they're kind of flexible, but they go together, and it depends on not one specific number, because what one person's expenses and lifestyle is are completely different than what another's is. So, a single person might incorporate for tax purposes much sooner than someone who has a family, and because they need more money to support the family, and you don't want to be paying double taxes on money that you need to take care of your family.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. There's also a couple rather specific questions here about what should people personally do for themselves or for their business. So reiterating what Jeff said at the very beginning of this webinar, or at the very beginning of his presentation, if you have specific questions like that, I would definitely recommend taking the conversation outside this webinar, either contacting Jeff or another attorney or accountant. So this way you can talk about the specifics of your businesses and really get into detail there about what's right for you and what's right for the company that you're either starting or currently working with. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the proper way to handle very specific questions like that?
Sure. I mean, if there's something that looks at you that seems that it might apply to a number of people, not just one person, then we can bring it up. It's your call.
Okay. So for some of those questions, if there are some specific questions here, I may make your question, you being the general you out here, not you, Jeff, a little more vague, so this way I can apply to a few more people. So we do have a clarifying question here from Ram, Jeff, and so Ram says, is it right to say that an S Corp provides the liability protections of an LLC or corporation with the tax treatment of passing through income to personal taxes? Is that correct?
It is.
Awesome. Thank you. So that was an easy one.
Always with the caveat that you maintain the integrity, the individual integrity of that entity. As long as you do that, the answer is yes.
Gotcha. Awesome. Great. So moving right along then. So there's a few more questions here about when to actually start the business, and is it too late to start start a business, to start a corporation or to formally incorporate in some way. So if you've already been freelancing for a few years, is it too late to start a corporation, or is there a time that they should have done it already?
Well, let's start with too late. It's never too late. Like I said, your life circumstances, your business circumstances can change. You know, whether from income, from job, pre-COVID, post-COVID, lots of things have changed over the years. So, I mean, I changed my status. So, is it too late? No, it's never too late. It's just a question of what's right for you right now. Looking in hindsight, should you have done something sooner? Maybe the answer is yes. Certainly, if you have a situation where there was a liability and someone sued you and you ended up being personally responsible, certainly you could say, gee, I wish I'd had a corporation then. So that's one of the things that, just want to look at realistically and say, is there, what is my potential exposure for liability? Am I providing products? Am I providing a service that may or may not involve liability? I have a lot of clients who are in the IT business, and the services they provide could end up potentially with data breaches or data losses, or potentially there's some serious damage that could happen. So A, we want to have a corporation or a limited liability company. B, in the contracts that we do, we create a certain amount of disclaimers and waivers that say, listen, I'm going to do this, but this is the limit of my liability. And we do that by limiting the warranty. We have a cap on the amount of dollar damages that are possible. We make sure there's good insurance, and certainly that's true in food products and tools, of course, kids products. So anything where someone can get hurt. For better or worse, we live in a very litigious country. Our legal system is such that it's easy to, anybody can sue anybody at any time for anything. So whenever the question says, can I sue? Someone's going to win, but can they sue? Can you sue? Yes. Even if you win, it's going to cost you. It could end up costing you. So we want to look at your contracts. We want to look at your insurance, and make sure that we properly assess what the real liability is, and take that into account. And however you're relating to people, if you're designing logos, probably the only liability you're going to, if you get sued by someone who says that's mine, or you're infringing mine, or you copied mine, your logo is too close to mine, I'm suing you. Here's a cease and desist, which is the first thing someone who's saying that is going to send out. Here's a cease and desist. Stop using that. Now, if you've invested a substantial amount in that, maybe not the creation of the logo so much, but now you've invested a lot by having it on your website, on your products. The whole world knows this. There could be some liability there. So even as a graphic designer, sometimes there's some potential liability, intellectual property rights, and different kinds of liability if you're in the areas of products and other kinds of services. So I'll tell you, there are certain things in the practice of law that have a higher risk of liability that I won't touch for exactly that reason. I just don't want, I don't even want the possibility of it. Apart from the fact that, being a lawyer is like being a doctor too. People have different specialties. So just because I know something about contracts doesn't mean I know anything about criminal law. So I wouldn't touch that. I don't do family law. I don't do stuff that involves a lot of local regulation. Just too much to know. So all this relates back to your question: is it too late? It's never too late, and always depends on your personal circumstances.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. We have another question here from Katie that I think applies to a lot of people on this call. So Katie asks, if you're freelancing on the side, for example, you have a steady main income from something else or from a full-time job, how does that affect or impact your decision-making about which business structure to look at?
Well, one of the things is how does it interfere with or conflict with any agreement you have with your employer? That's really the biggest thing there. Do you have an employment contract? And remember, contracts don't have to be in writing. They can be oral. Any relationship you have where, here, you do this for me and I'll do that for you. That's a contract. It's an oral contract and might be harder to prove than a written contract, but it's still an enforceable contract. So if you went to work for somebody as a graphic designer, and then you're doing graphic design on the side for the same client's problem, for competing with your employer, maybe problem. So a lot of it depends on what is the relationship with your present employer. These choices do not really impact the choice of entity. This situation is, do you do that business at all? And then once you decide to do that business, then we can apply the three factors of liability, taxes, and investors to whether or not you should operate as a sole proprietor or a limited liability company or a corporation. But the first thing is, what is the nature of the relationship with your employer and how is that affected? Because you're likely to have some sort of confidentiality agreement. You're likely to have some sort of intellectual property rights or work for hire agreement, maybe non-solicitation. If you're doing work for someone who is a client of your employer, that's potentially a problem. So, if you're in-house, let's say you're an in-house graphic designer working for.
Oops. It looks like we just lost Jeff there. So let me see if I can get him back on. Sorry about that. As this relates to our webinar, though, as this relates back to our webinar, just as Jeff was talking about how you got to know what's right for you and what's going to be right for your business. And also more importantly to our last question there about knowing what's working and what's not for your previous agreements. Sometimes things do come up. So if you do know what your previous agreements are, if you do know what you are allowed to do, if you are allowed to freelance on the side, then it'll give you some more flexibility and some more answers to some of those questions. So while we wait for Jeff to join back in here, I really do want to thank everyone for all the questions so far and for joining us so far. I am dropping into the chat box a link to our Upwork feedback survey. Excuse me. And we do listen to everything you write down. One of the reasons that this webinar came to be is that we're getting a lot of questions about business structures. And so with that, that's where we went out and we found a speaker that can talk to it. So if you do have ideas for future events, if you have feedback for how this event went and either what you liked or what you think could have gone better, please definitely throw this into this feedback survey and let us know. I'd love to know your thoughts. And with that, it does look like we've got you back here, Jeff. Are you able to hear us?
I can. Sorry about that.
No problem. Technology problems happen all the time.
Okay.
You cut out there kind of in the middle of what you were talking about in terms of freelancing on the side. And you were discussing how knowing your agreements with your employer. So if you are an in-house graphic designer, knowing if you can work with other people and things like that.
Yeah, and we're talking about, if you're doing something that is similar to what you're doing for your employer as a competitor, like, if you're working for Disney, when you're doing logos for your friends and clients, probably not a problem. But if you're doing animated features, probably a problem. So it depends on what your relationship is and what your job is. So that doesn't affect your choice of entity. I have a situation right now where a person who is working for an airline wants to be a part of a startup little charter airline, sort of like a taxi airline, and she wants to create a company to do that in another country, and she wants to basically hide it. And I've never believed in trying to create entities to hide things, because people find out, and the more entities you do that, unless you have a lot of money and now you've got this sort of network of entities in the Caymans and all over the world, it's not that hard for employers and other people to find out who owns what. So I never really believed in basing your business strategy on other people not finding out.
That seems like a good policy there. So we do have a couple of cautionary questions, I guess, is the best way to preference them. So what happens if you mix your personal and your business in an LLC? You were saying before how you should keep them very separate. So what happens if you do blur those lines?
Well, that goes back to Queen Elizabeth I. That goes back to the very essence of what this whole protection of entities is about, is that they're separate parties. Okay, so what if you don't? Okay, maybe you've heard the expression piercing the corporate veil. Okay, so you've got an entity, corporation, or a limited liability company, and it protects you. Think of it as a shield between you and a creditor, and it protects you from liability. But if you don't maintain that independence, if you start commingling funds and you do what Neal just said you might do, okay, then the creditor says, well, you didn't maintain that entity. You didn't maintain the integrity of that separate entity. So we think we should be able to get past the LLC or past the corporation to you personally. And we want to pierce the corporate veil so we can get to your personal assets. That's the downside. So, if you don't have a lot of risk, then maybe it doesn't mean much. But certainly some of the things I was talking about, that where the liability could be substantial, whether it's data breaches or data loss or product liability, you really want to make sure that you've got that protection, because it's fairly, it's significant, and you really want to have it. So that's the downside of not maintaining that individual integrity of the entities.
Thank you. So it looks like we have time for just maybe one or two more questions here. So here's a possibly an easy one, but someone is asking about something they heard through the grapevine. So is it accurate that an S corporation gives an owner lower taxes or a lower tax liability after gross receipts exceed $50,000?
No, it depends on your personal tax rate when that happens. So that is not true. It totally depends on how much the company makes and what your personal tax rate is. So don't know the answer to it. It could, like I said, the corporate tax rate is 21%. Okay, how much income do you have? What's your personal tax? What's your personal income? That's what will determine whether or not it's a better deal. And all you gotta do, it's not a hard calculation. Just take a look and say, okay, what if this income goes right to me versus what if this much income goes to the company? But remember, an S Corp, I guess the question was, what is the benefit of an S Corp, I guess, as opposed to a regular Corp? I guess that, or a C Corp, I guess that's the question. And it really comes back to comparing your personal tax rate to the corporate tax rate. And the truth of it is, as the income of the company grows, the likelihood that you're going to pay less taxes with a C Corp grows. Okay. The lower the income is, you'd rather have it as a pass-through. As it goes up, at some point, that's when you want to go change to a corporation as opposed to an S Corp.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. So we've had a few questions here, and I think this is a good place to end on this last question about kind of furthering that, about mixing personal expenses with the corporate expenses. And so Susan Foster, I think, asked this question pretty well. If you aren't supposed to mix personal money with business money, how do you fund the business when starting out?
You make an investment, you book it as an investment, or you make a loan to the company and you keep a record of it. Okay. Again, think of the business as me or Neal. Okay. And Neal comes to me. I think I froze again.
We can still hear you. Your video looks like it's frozen. If you want to shut off your video, that may help.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me shut that off. Where'd it go? Let me shut off my video. The video, stop video. Did it work?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay. So think of, Neal or I come to you and say, I want to borrow some money, or I have a project. Put the money in our pockets, or would you have a deal? You'd have a loan agreement. You'd have something that said you invested in what we're doing. So either one of those, that's how you do it. So if you're going to start a business and you're going to put $1,000 into it, that's exactly what you do. You show it as an investment of $1,000, and then you pay whatever incorporation expenses you had or whatever. Right? That's exactly how you do it. And you do that investment equity at the beginning to show that you took it seriously, and it's a real separate entity. Later on, maybe you lend some more money to the business, but that's exactly how you do it. Again, independent person. What would you do if Neal or I came to you and said, give me $1,000 to start a business? Okay, exact same thing.
Awesome,
Okay.
Thank you. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. I know there's a lot of other questions that people have. So if people do have further questions, how can they get in touch with you to learn more?
They can get in touch with me through my Upwork profile or my website. My email is that okay to give out on here?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to throw it in the chat too.
Jeff.Stoller@jstollerlaw.com.
Awesome. So that just to clarify, it's jeff.stoller@jstoller.com.
Stoller Law.
Stoller Law. Okay, thank you. So I'll put that in the chat. So if anybody wants it, they can see it there.
Okay.
And then otherwise, Jeff, thank you again for joining us. I know personally I have a page and a half full of notes here, so I'm ready to look back through them. If anyone didn't take notes or missed some things, don't worry, this webinar was recorded. And so usually it takes us about a day or so to get the recording up online, but you can check out the recording through the Upwork events page, the Upwork community events page to be specific, pretty much through that same link that you used to attend or to register for today's webinar. That's where you'll be able to find the recording. Again, give us about a day or two to get it edited with captions and upload it there. Otherwise, thank you again, Jeff, for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy the view outside your window. And to everyone else, thank you for joining and good luck with your businesses.
Thanks again. Thanks, Neal. Thanks, everybody, for coming.